hereby call to order the Roseville Economic Development Authority meeting for Monday, September 16th, 2024. Mr. Executive Director, would you call the roll, please?
Member Groff?
Here.
Member Strawn?
Here.
Member Etna?
Here.
Sure. Member Schroeder?
I'm here.
And President Rowe?
Here. All right, and with us at the dais, we have our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who is going to attempt to handle EDA questions this evening, no doubt, and also our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, who is also the Executive Director of the EDA. We have a number of staff and guests who are participating this evening, and we'll make those introductions as agenda items come up. I would note for both the EDA meeting and the council meeting, if you'd like to see any of the meeting materials and you haven't got them available to you online, you can certainly access a paper copy that we've got one complete copy of all the meeting materials in the back of the meeting council chamber under the big clock. We also have extra copies of the meeting agenda available for the public as well, so you can follow along. We ask if you have a cell phone to make sure that you silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting. And with that, we'll ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on our agenda this evening for the EDA is to consider approving tonight's agenda. We just have the two business items this evening, so I'm imagining there's probably not a lot of changes that are going to be suggested at this point.
Move approval.
All right.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Atten, seconded by Councilmember Strawn, or I should say Board Member Atten and Board Member Strawn, to approve tonight's agenda for the EDA as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda this evening. We'll delay public comment to the start of the council meeting, as we usually do with EDA meetings at the start of the evening. That allows us to get right into our business items. And our first business item this evening, item 5A, is to consider entering into a professional services agreement with Stantec to conduct a housing needs assessment for the city. And with us this evening, we have our Housing and Economic Development Director, Coordinator,
Program Manager.
Program Manager, I knew
Every time.
for
We're doing
Jeannie
really well
Kelsey
there
to introduce this item this evening.
Thank you, President Rowe and board members. For your consideration, last meeting that you had, we did bring forward to you 6 different variety of proposals for a market study, and we made recommendation as to one of them that really addressed all the things that you had given us guidance on. Hence, we have Stantec tonight for you. There was a couple of questions that staff could not answer, and so we did bring them in, and I'm going to turn it over to them. They do have just a couple slides that they wanted to go through with you, as it will answer some of the questions that you did have from the last meeting. So we'll bring Tom Layton and also Spencer Cox from Stantec up.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Welcome.
Pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for inviting us. Just a quick introduction. My name's Tom Layton. I've been with Stantec 5 or 6 years. Prior to that, I was doing consulting on my own since 2012. And prior to that, I was a city planner with the city of Minneapolis for 15 years. Spencer and I are part of a business unit within Stantec that's called Development Economics, and we provide services. Really, we're the lead business center for development economics for Stantec in the U.S., provides services to projects all across the U.S. in that regard, including housing studies, economic development strategies. We support planning studies with market studies and other services. Base a lot of our work on familiarity with what the development community needs in order to do the kind of development interventions you may want in different communities. So that's a little bit about what we do. Spencer, want to say a word or two about yourself?
Thanks for having me. I'm Spencer Cox. I've been with Stantec for 2 years, kind of an economist and data scientist role, and before that I finished a PhD at the University of Minnesota in geography, mostly economic and urban geography. Yes, I've been working with Tom now for the past 2 years in a supportive role in a lot of these housing studies, and happy to be here today. Thank you.
So we had the opportunity to watch your previous meeting and just really appreciated the discussion. So as Jeannie said, we just want to give a very high-level overview of the way we approach these and then go to our calendar to let you know how we see this playing out and the points in the process at which we see involving you and bringing product to you and getting your feedback to sharpen the analysis and the strategies for your benefit. There we go. This is just a slide that shows a collection of headlines on how housing issues are just pressing in all parts of the country these days. I just thought I'd illustrate a little bit about where we're working. You can see it's a wide geographic range. It's wide also in terms of rural communities to urban communities. As you know, we've worked in Shoreview, New Brighton, Vadnais Heights, some smaller cities in Minnesota, and in locations as large as the Indianapolis metropolitan area. This is really the one slide where I want to just note the two areas that we have felt a responsibility to develop very sharp practices around. And I think that we feel like we bring to you and we bring to other communities. The one is that housing studies tend to lean heavily on information that's somewhat out of date because census data is on the average 4 years old. And so we've developed some ways to both be more thorough in our analysis of housing conditions in a community and more current by being able to access multiple data sources and bring those together in a more sophisticated way that lets us understand in a more real-time sense what your housing gaps are, what the needs are based on your inventory and your demographics. So we've done a lot of work on our analysis, and I think we've got some processes that are unique in the region. The other thing that we feel is unique in the way we approach this is that we have really emphasized the solution side, the strategy side of this. A lot of the market analysts give primary focus to the numbers and telling you here's some demand numbers for different types of housing products. We have developed a practice where we really tee up a set of strategies that once we understand your needs that you can consider because they will, in one way or another, they are appropriate for addressing those needs. And then we can prioritize those with you. We can refine the ones that you think are a best fit for this community. So we have worked very hard on the strategy side as well. This one is going to be a little hard to read, but this is our overall project calendar. And what I'll point you to is the overview level. If you'll look on the second row of the report, you'll see there's a kickoff phase. We'll be out here driving around your community, looking at the housing inventory, talking to people about the needs. There's an analytical phase where we really do drill down and understand your demographics, your economics, the housing market context, the supply, and put those together into a sharp understanding of the gaps and the needs. Some of this is also, what we learned from stakeholders, what we learned from you, what we learned from talking to developers. And then that builds into our strategies research. So that happens as I sort of suggested earlier, that happens in two phases. And this is where some of the homelessness strategies that you're particularly interested fit in. We look at best practices. We have a library of best practices already that have worked in other communities, some of which may be appropriate here. And we tee up oftentimes 10, 12, 15 strategies to bring back to you and discuss with you. And really look to your input for these are the ones that I think are the best fit for us, and I would like to see a little more research on this or a little more research on that. We do a second round and sort of finalize that as a menu of strategies that that belong in your strategic agenda. So that's the strategies phase. And again, as I suggested, it involves conversation with you when we bring up those tentative strategies. And I know there's expertise on this board in terms of housing and housing strategies. So we'll look forward to talking to you about that. And then the final phase is the document phase. So that's how it plays out. If you look at the row 2.1, we have, and row 2.3, those rows will be combined. So we like to work with an advisory panel, a group of stakeholders, so that we have that sounding board. And I understand that your staff feel that you want to be engaged at that level. So we will be seeing you as that advisory board and coming to you when we've finished our analysis to discuss that with you, coming to you when we've finished our initial list of inventory of strategies to discuss those with you, and then coming to you again at the end of the study to get any further feedback you have. So those are the touch points we have envisioned for you. Ms. Kelsey has already told us that these may not perfectly align with your board calendar, so that's fine. We'll just adjust it so that it makes sense with your existing calendars. So I think with that, I'll pause, and that's kind of the overview of how we see this playing out, and would be very happy to take questions about the material that we've presented, or about anything else that you want to talk about with regard to how we approach these.
All right, thank you very much. And one thing I'll just note too, just at least from my perspective, is certainly we could conceivably have a special EDA meeting on the evening of one of our council meetings if the agendas work out okay, if that fits better with the schedule. I don't know that we need to strictly stick to what the pre-planned EDA meetings are if we need to make some adjustments there. And we can certainly have those conversations between staff and the board and the consultants as appropriate, but I did want to just note that certainly we can add some flexibility in there as we need to, because the council meets 2 to 3 times a month, and so we've got those dates where we're all going to be here anyway. We might as well see if it works, if we need to do that in the schedule.
Great.
Questions from members of the EDA board for the consultant, Member Etten.
Thank you for being here and kind of explaining some things. As you look at this homelessness question, really, as we try to explore how we can interact with it, I think one of the big questions is, what can a city like Roseville do versus Minneapolis, Indianapolis, whatever. So do you feel like, as you look at, you said you have a collection of strategies, you already have best practices, there will be a number of things that can work for a mid-sized suburban city versus some of these bigger urban cores with larger staffs and other resources that we may not have?
Yeah. I want to first, that's a great question. And I'd like to respond to it more in terms of our process, in terms of how we develop that menu of strategies. But I want to recognize that you've got some really important foundation that you've already established here. I think your tenant notification ordinance is really helpful. I know you've got staff that are dedicated to reaching out to homeless individuals. So you've got a really helpful foundation. I was mapping this out conceptually before the meeting, and we can think about homelessness as addressing a population that is already unhoused, and in that sense, we've got strategies that relate to building structures of various kinds that they can move into, and strategies that related to connecting them with services. Upstream of that, we have our homeless prevention strategies, right? And some of those may be regulatory. Again, they may be programmatic or service provision, and there's a sort of a universe of parties that are bringing some of those to the table already. None of this answers your question yet about where does Roseville plug in. Upstream of that, yet, I think are a really important set of strategies that we shouldn't take lightly, and that is providing a stable foundation for families in ways that, are super important. Strong education system, connected back to families, food availability. So I would say some of those may be strategies that you may want to consider, just in terms of providing a fundamental floor or foundation for stability. So within that, the way that we would think about bringing you strategies to consider in some of those different areas is number one, literature review and talking to peers to develop a set of case studies. But beyond that, there are people who are in this arena who will have smart answers to a question that put to them that asks, what are some ways you've thought of that a local government can make your job easier or can fill a hole that you sometimes see is unattended to? So we would plan to have that conversation with providers, with your outreach, homelessness outreach coordinator, with other folks that are in this arena. And I think through those two mechanisms, then we can bring you at those different tiers a set of, possible activities or programs or actions that you can engage in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's better than a simple answer.
Great. Member Schroeder?
Yes, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you about in your attachment 1 here under the work plan, you're talking about stakeholder and developer interviews. And I guess I'd like to hear, one, who would the stakeholders be and how would we go about identifying the correct group of people to involve in this part of the study?
I imagine that there's insights in this group that could fairly quickly outline a set of stakeholders related to housing needs that relate to the things that you're doing in Roseville. So that's one set. One of the reasons that we emphasize developer interviews is because we know you're not hiring us just to, address this area that you're keenly interested in. You're interested in understanding sort of the array of housing needs and gaps in Roseville and housing types, that can be attracted to Roseville to meet those needs. And we find that through some, objective analytical processes, we can learn some things about those gaps and understand the market to some degree. But in many of those strategies, you're trying to attract a certain development type, and your deeper insights and more direct insights are going to come from developers who are building that type of development type, who can say, okay, if we're doing sort of a missing middle housing format at, or smaller format apartments or whatever the case may be in this area, that may or may not be attractive to us to do on a strictly market basis. You may need to provide some incentives for that, or what they can give us sort of a more nuanced idea about the availability of attracting that development type to Roseville. So we do with the types of housing that we determine, would meet needs here. It'll include some affordable housing types and other things. We will be talking to developers who will be able to inform our thinking about what it would take to attract that kind of development to Roseville. And I know you're already getting some development completely organically, and we don't have the complete background in terms of which development projects are receiving some city support and which ones aren't, but that'll all be part of what we want to understand.
So who would the other stakeholders be besides the developers?
Well, I assume it would be people who are providing homelessness services, some of your staff that's working in that area. Other things aren't coming to mind.
Yeah,
here,
there's
but-
urban planners that are really useful in terms of understanding how housing fits into comprehensive plans. It's really important to provide or understand context of nonprofit housing developers and nonprofit service providers to understand what challenges that they're facing in the market and what challenges they're facing amongst populations that they serve. And it's always really useful to talk to realtors as well, because realtors know the market inside and out, and they'll be able to get a more nuanced understanding of neighborhood and neighborhood patterns and what's happening in a market. So we kind of work on getting nonprofit, public sector, and private development, and kind of hearing those different perspectives that allow us to triangulate and kind of understand what the major problems are, how people are already trying to solve it, and what would they like to see to kind of address problems that they're facing in the community more directly.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for, because the developers have a good voice, and it's an important voice, but it's only one view of it. And I was curious to see what the other stakeholders were going to be to help round out that view. So thanks.
It's really helpful to get the triangulation in our experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Member Strong.
Thank you. So I had a question. It sounded like you were talking a lot about cross-agency work or consideration. And because we are not the school board or the school district, and we have 2 school districts in Roseville, and then we being part of Ramsey County, which does impact a lot of what we do here. Of course, the state does as well. How do you see the results of what you're coming up with impacting them? How do they know about it if it's something that is a deliverable that gets set into their lap? I don't know that we've said, hey, we're going to do this housing study and here's how it could impact you. Of course, as a taxpayer, I'm concerned, are we funding this for all these other folks? So I guess I wanted to know kind of the scope and magnitude of how that would be for agencies outside of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the really tricky things about this policy area is there are so many external parties that are already deeply invested in it. So I don't see it as wanting to take something that someone else is already doing, but again, getting to that question of really wanting to understand what needs are being met, what roles different parties are playing, and looking for some best practices that really are about how local communities are supplementing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
To add on to that, I think there's diverse interests, right, in the housing market and how it influences what gets developed and what doesn't, and what housing is available. One of the things that we find really helpful in this process is getting feedback along the process that helps us understand what language to use, understand how to frame things that will be effective at communicating and using this as a living document that can help support aims and needs of the community. And one of the other things as being a consultant is that we can also be an independent voice that can help provide some really objective data-based figures to help really understand the market that can also challenge and push back in some ways that are really productive in those conversations. And so like one example is we were working in a community in Ohio, a suburb much like yourselves, Mentor, Ohio, and their school board was concerned about increasing the density of households within the community because their projections for what the school could hold had already been met. But when we started to present information and kind of work through kind of the housing gaps and housing affordability and how it's pushing families out and making a challenge to actually introduce new families provided a supportive environment, it helped produce a more productive conversation across those different groups. So I think it was a matter of listening and understanding what those issues are, working then on producing a report that can kind of address some of those concerns and do so effectively, and then produce a final document then that can, facilitate more productive dialogue down the road.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Member Groff.
It isn't really a question, it's more a comment, listening to all the questions that have been brought up. What I'm hoping to get from this is to see how we can have a balance of housing in Roseville that's not out of balance, because some of the residents worry that we're going one way too much or one way, they see certain things being built and they bring that up. So we don't have very much developable land left in Roseville, and we need to use it very wisely. So that's what I'm hoping to see from this, some data. Actually looking forward instead of backward. I appreciate your comments about using other data because demographics, that material gets old very quickly, especially when you think 4 years right now. That would put us in the middle of COVID, which is a very different time. So that's what I'm hoping to see in this study.
Yeah. So one thing that's really useful, I think, in this is that we like to include a lot of comparison studies in the analytical phase. So we'll use, not just Roseville, we'll use Roseville in the county, so in Ramsey County, in the broader state of Minnesota, but also compare it to other cities within the metro that you would consider to be comparable cities. And when you start to see the development trajectories and trends in those other places in juxtaposition to Roseville, you start to get an understanding too of like where Roseville is or is not competing within the local market, how it is or is not fitting particular gaps or needs. So we think that kind of comparison analysis and being able to synthesize and visualize that data convincingly is really helpful in terms of understanding, are we missing that kind of missing middle 2 to 5 unit developments? Do we really need to be focusing on higher density in those locations? Or have we been far exceeding that level of development compared to other comparable locations? And, you know, do we need to make an adjustment based on that? So by having that comparison across those places and really focusing on how Roseville juxtaposes to those can be very productive too, and kind of understanding the housing mix that makes sense for the community.
Thanks.
One of the things that we've seen varied widely between Shoreview, New Brighton, and Venice Heights is the level of naturally occurring affordable housing, older apartment stock in those communities. There's just a tremendous amount in some communities and much less in others. And I don't have a sense yet for where you're situated in that, but I'll be interested to see.
Right. We do have the request before us. Oh, I should ask, we'll provide an opportunity. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to speak to this request to enter into the agreement with Stantec to provide the housing study for the city of Roseville? Does not appear to be the case. All right. With that, we've got the requested action, which is a request to authorize the president and executive director to enter into that professional services agreement with Stantec for that housing needs assessment.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Member Strawn, seconded by Member Etten. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Member Strawn.
Nothing further.
All right, Member Etten as the seconder.
No, thank you.
All right, any additional discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, and thank you again for being here and presenting this evening and answering the questions. And I just would note, if we could follow up and have the presentation be made part of the record of the packet going forward, so that the public can refer to that as well, as long as there's nothing proprietary or secret in there. And
It's fine.
sweep it or clean it if you need to.
No, it's fine.
But with that request, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we'll enter into that agreement.
Yep.
Thank you for being here again this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Our next business item for the EDA this evening is our first look at the proposed 2025 EDA budget and tax levy. And we have our Community Development Director, Janice Gunlock, with us this evening to bring this before us for our consideration and hopeful recommendation to the council for approval. Ms. Gunlock.
Thank you, President Rowe, members of the board. Every year, the EDA must review and recommend a preliminary budget and levy to the City Council. Staff did provide a first draft of that budget and levy to you on July 15th. During that discussion, board members requested that staff bring a preliminary budget and levy back to you that resulted in a 0 increase for 2025. That direction was based on some of the EDA actuals as well as the fund balance in the EDA. We did go back and take a look at that, and that would require a reduction of $11,621 based on what was brought to you on July 15th. We did do that, and the budget comparison in your packet results in an additional $9,500 cut from economic development consulting fees. An additional $2,000 was cut from professional services under the general EDA, and that primarily goes towards paying the recording secretary as well as the EDA attorney. And then we also reduced an additional $500 from staff training and conference costs. And so, taking into consideration the additional cuts we made since July with the other cuts as well as increases that were proposed on July 15th, I'll just go through them really quickly. The preliminary budget and levy before you results in an increase in staff salaries and benefits. It's just shy of $6,000. Reductions in the energy audit funding of $1,000. That's based on some of the actuals that we reviewed. We think we're still funded in order to meet the demand for that. The total amount of cutting from our economic development consulting budget is $19,500. We also cut the full funding for the business education series. That's about $2,000. We talked about this last time, but essentially those meetings haven't really been happening. And even when they were happening, we were getting very little to no participation from Roseville businesses. So we don't think cutting that will be a big impact or any impact. We've also reduced all of the professional services under the general EDA expenditures. Again, this is primarily recording secretary and attorney's fees by $22,000. Training and education costs for EDA staff have been cut by $2,500, as well as training costs for board members. That was cut by $1,000 based on actuals. So with all of that, we are actually decreasing the 2025 budget proposed by $379, which is 0.1%. It's a funny number, mostly because in cutting the budget, we didn't want to leave it at an odd number in the individual line items. So that is the preliminary budget and levy that's before you. The resolution in your packet would need to be adopted if that's acceptable to the EDA in order to meet the deadlines for the preliminary levy being set. That's all I have, but I'm happy to address any questions of the board.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gunlock, and that's a good point on the timing of things. We do, as a city, have to certify our levy to the, or not to exceed levy to the county by the end of this month. And so the purpose of this discussion is to recommend something to the city council, take action on, I believe, at our September 23rd meeting. So that's why we have this before us this evening. With that, just clarification on timing and procedure, are there any questions that the members of the board have for staff on what's being brought back before us? And thank you for reminding me. I should have remembered that we had had this discussion earlier this year in my introductory comments. Questions from the board? Member Schroeder.
Yes, thank you for coming back with this and keeping it flat. There's some good work in there. I do think the budget is still quite healthy, so I don't feel that any of these cuts are going to cause a hardship of any kind. I did have a question on, has this gone before the Finance Commission or will it go before the Finance Commission?
Board Member Schroeder, our budget calendar has not typically included bringing the EDA budget or levy to the Finance Commission. I know in the past when we've increased funding, for example, for housing programs, we have brought some of those minor programming items before the Finance Commission, but the whole budget itself has not typically been brought before the Finance Commission, no.
Because yes, it seems to be the only part of our budget that doesn't go before it, so I thought it might make sense to do that.
Well, and certainly it could probably be incorporated into the discussion. We have our finance director, Ms. Petrick, who would like to help us with this item.
As part of the overall budget packet that goes to the Finance Commission, and they have looked at this at the last two meetings, the EDA general fund is included within that packet. So the expenditures and the tax levy are part of their overall packet.
But in fairness to Member Schroeder's comment, we don't spend much time at all, if any, at the Finance Commission going over the details of the EDA budget. It is included in the large packet of information, that is correct, but we don't spend any time. When I go and speak to them, I don't talk directly about the EDA budget and the ins and outs as Ms. Gunlock did, so it's a fair point.
Thank you.
And Member Atten.
I would like to thank you for your work. I know that, as I think I said last time, this budget is the most opaque, clear. And, wait, time out.
Transparent.
It's most transparent, there we go, thank you, budget we have, and that certainly has put you under a microscope that may feel almost unfair. So appreciate the great work you've done to make this budget always something that's very manageable, yet is doing critical work in our city.
Right. We'll double check. Are there other questions, or do we have anyone from the public who wishes to speak to the proposed EDA budget and tax levy? We do. I'll just remind folks, member of the public is coming up. The time limit for public comment is 3 minutes, and I try to enforce that gently. And we do ask if you state your name and address or street for the record to begin your comments and direct comments or questions to the council. And with that, welcome.
Roger Hess, Jr., Wagner Place. This isn't about this coming year's budget, but during next year, I would like the three cities and the county to take a look and see if Rice Larpenter has done, that alliance has done what you wanted them to do. Because the people running it are very dedicated and talented, but I think they've been given the wrong goals to be working on. Because our area still hasn't gotten any better, and after all these years and all the money you've spent, we've had festivals and things and artwork, which are great, but we really need redevelopment there. It's like this Dale Selby used to be the worst area. After redevelopment, people want to be that area. Well, we haven't gotten any better in all these years. And I thought when my building was, and when I decided to sell my commercial building in Rice, I assumed the Lions had developers all set up to implement the master plan we have. You spend a lot of money on a master plan, but they had nothing ready to go for that. The L&Z property came available. It was on sale for 2 years, and the Rice Alliance didn't even know it was for sale. And then there was a big plan for that in the master plan. So anyway, I would like you, the three cities in the county, to get together this coming year and see if things are going the way you want it to. If they're not, then redirect things. Or if they are going the way you want, that's fine. But I think you should take a look at it this coming year.
Great. Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak to the proposed EDA budget and tax levy for 2025? It does not appear to be the case. We've got the request before us, and once again, this is a not to exceed. We do get another chance to take a look at this if we need to reduce, but we can't increase after this recommendation. The resolution is a resolution to recommend this budget and levy to the City Council for authorization to the county at the September 23rd meeting. Is there a motion in relation to that resolution?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Member Groff, seconded by Member Strawn, to approve the resolution authorizing the council to forward the proposed tax levy at the September 23rd meeting, or words to that effect. Discussion on the motion as the maker, Member Groff.
I'd just like to thank staff for working on this after we requested some changes. They did a very good job on that and came up with the numbers that we had requested, so I appreciate it.
All right, and as the seconder, Member Strawn.
I'd like to echo those. Thank you for your work on this.
All right, other discussion on the motion? All right, with that, we've got the motion before us to adopt that resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. And that concludes the budget discussion for now for the EDA. That will be back before us later in the year before we do our final approval in December. That concludes the business before the EDA this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn the EDA?
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Member Schroeder, second by Member Groff to adjourn. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned at 6:38 p.m. We'll just take a few moments to reconfigure for the council meeting. We're back from a short break between the EDA and council meeting. Call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, September 16th, 2024. And the roll call will stand as previously called. And with that, we don't have to do the Pledge of Allegiance twice. So we can move right to consideration of the council agenda for this evening. And we'll double check with City Manager Trudgeon first to see if there are any staff recommended changes or required changes to the agenda this evening.
Mr. Mayor, there's no changes to the agenda.
All right. I imagine with no consent agenda and only a few business items, there may not be a council change either. All right, with that, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Any discussion on the motion to approve the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. That then brings us to our general public comment. At each meeting, we do have an opportunity for members of the public to speak to agenda items as they come forward, but we also do want, at the start of each meeting, to provide an opportunity for general public comment. This would be comment on items that are not on the agenda, but may either be of interest to people in the community or related to city business. Once again, we will have those opportunities for agenda items as they come up. So with that, we'll open it up for general public comment. I see we've got somebody raring to go, so
Okay.
recognize you and welcome you again for comment.
Roger S. Jr., Widener Place. And I wish more people would come up here and talk at public comment time. But anyway, the little area where I live is just north of Ramsey County Beach at Lake McCarran's, and we've hosted a large number of homeless people there for years. But this year is really getting out of hand. Last night when I drove by at 11:30, there are 7 cars with people living in them. I don't know how many other individuals are living in the park too. And when I drove by, I got yelled at by some of them because I was driving by. I guess they didn't like that. And then not too long ago, I found a nude male sleeping in my porch. So it's getting bad around there. I don't know if there's other areas of Roseville that have the same problems or not, but I think we need to do something about our area. So I don't know, some of us talked about getting a petition and like making no parking at 11 p.m. to 5 or something in our area. I don't know if you guys would pay attention to that or not. But then I was thinking, since you have housing navigators and the CAT team and everything, I was wondering if maybe could possibly schedule a meeting that the neighbors could get together with some of the city staff and see if there's a solution that can be made. Because it's just, one person's been living there now 18 months. And you have a housing navigator, I would think by now in 18 months, they would have, found a way for this person to live a decent life rather than living out of a van on the side of the road. But anyway, so if that's possible, it'd be nice to have someone contact some of us or let us know. But if it's not possible, that we understand and we can just do a petition and see if we can just get things done on our own. But thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. And certainly, I think that's something we should follow up with and see if we can't put together a neighborhood meeting or something of that sort.
Maybe they'd like to move over to Valley Park on Avon.
We will see. All right. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to comment at general public comment this evening? All right. Seeing no one then, we don't have any recognitions or items removed from consent, so we can move to our business items. Our first business item this evening is a joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Commission. Why don't we just take a couple of moments to allow the members to get up to the table and set up there.
I'll drive. Okay. We need chairs. Pull chairs up.
Yeah?
Tap that.
This is why we're up here.
Yeah.
There's no room for the council.
That's what I was so confused. It's like I thought
Yeah. It's too crowded.
I hate to admit my ignorance, but who's the chair these days?
That would be me. Hello, council.
All right, before we get started, I think we need to start the meeting here,
Oh,
just to make sure. Unless they didn't actually take a break. And I'm presuming that they'll come up. I just don't want to make sure we miss any, or that the members of the public miss any of our discussion. Okay, all right. I wasn't sure if we stopped or had to restart. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Chair Matt Spenson for introductory comments and perhaps a round of introductions of the members.
Yes. So I am Lindsay Matt Spenson. I'm the current chair of the Parks and Rec Commission. And we're just going to start with introductions like we do at our meetings. To my left,
Jamie Petty, Daryl Grau,
Joe Arneson,
Audrey Arneson,
Jessica Ragar.
Karen Beckman, and Karen is our vice chair. So tonight we wanted to kind of go through just some highlights that have been happening, some kind of community engagement, and then some next steps. And there is, we have one ask for you that was in your packet, and we will get to that as we go.
Sure. So I guess I'm going to kick things off. We had Rose Fest this year. I think this was our first year sort of on the reconfigured schedule. If you remember, we went down from 2 weeks to 1 week. We received a lot of positive feedback about sort of the more condensed schedule. And as part of that condensed schedule, the 10K was reduced to a 5K, and the fireworks were moved from the 4th to the 29th. So overall, I think it was, I shouldn't say we think that it was a great success, and we'll hope to continue with sort of the 1 week schedule moving forward. Other areas that we wanted to highlight is that we are doing, Dion has been working very hard at revamping sort of the Nature Center programs. And we've received a lot of positive feedback. And I know Commissioner Ragnar volunteers a lot at the Nature Center. And so we really appreciate Dion's efforts there and hope to continue increasing attendance moving forward. Our live at the Rug summer concert series, again, this year we decided to reduce the number of concerts in order to sort of have perhaps more quality versus quantity. I think that overall we've received positive feedback about the concert series this year. I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers of attendance. I know it was in our meeting agenda from last month, but I forgot to write that down. The new park at 2381 County Road B is underway. We'll have a couple discussions about that tonight, so I'll just hold off on that, but it's underway. We're 70% complete with the Emerald Ash Borer program. And then other items that we did as a council was we took 2 park tours as a council this year, one to Lexington Park and one to Rosebrook Park. Those parks were suggested because they're heavily used and also because there's some programming or equipment changes that we're looking at doing in those parks. And then finally, we completed a SWOT analysis, which I believe is in your packet.
So commission and community engagement. One of, I think, the best parts about the Parks and Rec Commission is how much we get to engage with our fellow Roseville citizens. During the summer, we had Discover Your Parks events. I know at least one was sadly rained out. Rain just kind of puts a damper on the summer sometimes. And so it's just a really great time to be out in the community hearing about things. So at the table, we had a QR code for folks to scan around the Rosebrook Park changes with the wading pool splash pad. Oh, lots of fun discussion with kids. They're very strong young citizens, strong feelings from our young citizens in the community. It's a really great way to engage the young folks. The Lexington Park planning is a really fun process. There have been 2 meetings so far. I've gotten to be at both of them, and it's been smaller groups, but also a really engaged group that really deeply cares about that park. I've seen Councilmember Strawn at both of those as well, and it's just been a really good process to think about it from an accessible and inclusive standpoint with the Friends of Roseville Park helping contribute to the cost of that park. It's my neighborhood park, it's my kids' favorite park, so it's really fun to get to engage them in that process as well, and it's really great to have that opportunity. The Bike Planning Committee, Commissioner Bolton, who is not here tonight, has been a part of that. I will probably not articulate it as well as I should, but looking at a bikeable Roseville. So they did bike tours around the city. They did a walking one, I believe, around Rosedale because it was not a great place to bike. I'm sure that's very surprising. And they are coming forth with some recommendations soon. And then the Natural Resources Management Plan Technical Advisory Committee, which is a really long name for a really wonderful program that Daryl Brown has been a part of learning, and I think it was a partnership with Stantec, that's looking at all the different areas in Roseville and coming up with a plan there. So if you have questions on that, direct them to Daryl.
So I think there might be a little bit of repeat here, but we also, the staff put out an RFP for a new recreation management system, which in our opinion is needed. They received a number of answers to that call, and they're currently underway of reviewing the proposals, and I believe that that'll come to the commission sometime soon here. The park that I referred to earlier, the new park, is being actually built this weekend. So I think it's 85% complete. And again, the build is going to be this weekend for the playground equipment. On Lexington Park, they've completed 2 community-wide or neighborhood-wide meetings. We also solicited feedback at the Discover Your Parks. The final plan has sort of been developed, and now we're just waiting for sort of the schematics to come through for the commission's review. For Rosebrook, park amenities, as Chair Matt Spencer mentioned, we're looking into perhaps removing the pool and replacing with a splash pad. We've conducted surveys over the Discover Your Parks, and also just having it posted at different parks events. So we've received feedback. We need to analyze that feedback, and we probably need to go back and acquire more feedback. So that's sort of where we're at with that. And then, Daryl, do you have any updates for the natural resources?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we engaged with Stantec. We had, as you know, there was a contract with Stantec. I believe it was a 10-year contract, which came to conclusion for the natural resources in Roseville. And as a commission, we felt that the work that they had done was exceptional over the past 10 years. We're very pleased with everything that they had done and the accomplishments that they made. And the conclusion is, kind of the question is, well, what next? And so the commission got very engaged with discussing this, and asked Director Johnson to essentially get something going with Stantec to kind of talk about where the things could be next, and come back to the commission. And so we had a recommendation to formalize this technical action committee, and with that, it was the key concept was to have very significant engagement with Roseville community at large, have Stantec be kind of at the center, somewhat driving, but mostly it's more for analytical purposes, and then with the Parks and Rec department to be also very engaged with it. And today we had 2 meetings to start with. One was just an introductory with bringing the community together. It was very well attended. A lot of good discussion. People were they are very engaged, very passionate. And so we had an introductory meeting. Stantec then went out and did a survey of all the parks, put together a very detailed document, essentially kind of like a needs assessment, and they did some of their prioritizing. Said, well, these are the priorities as they see it, but again, it's not. They made it real clear. It's not. It's not our decision. It's the city's decision basically to go back and digest that then essentially prioritize, put goals together. So we have our third meeting coming up this week on Wednesday, and that's the objective of that meeting is to really go through the documentation, and which we've had a couple months to look, preview it, and essentially put together kind of a roadmap over the next years to as far as what is it that we want to do to improve our parks, and from a maintenance standpoint, it's a lot of it had to do like with invasives, with our trees, canopy, things of that nature. So I can't say enough how impressed I was of one with the job that Stantec did with this thorough report that they put together, but then also especially engagement of the community, because they have we've got a lot of really talented people here in Roseville, and they really have a lot of good ideas, and that was kind of the beauty of this too, is that Stantec listened to the feedback. It wasn't just one-sided. It was like kind of like again explaining and then getting a lot of good feedback and taking that.
Thank you. All right, so the part everybody's been waiting for is, again, one of the fun parts of this commission is we get to discuss and recommend names for new parks in the city. And so the process we went through is a very similar process that we've gone through in the past, except for we got stickers this time. So we received 43 names, and what we did is we had all of the names up on chart paper, and we all got, I think, three-ish stickers, and we voted to narrow down the list because we thought that was a really great way to just kind of narrow that down, get a general feeling of what we thought. Things that we kind of removed from the list right away were ones that didn't fit with the naming policy. So we wanted to make sure that the name was a natural space, a geographic location, and it wasn't associated with a name, an association, a business, unless there was a significant contribution. And there wasn't for that park. So the name that we would like to put forward for this park is Sunset Park. And that is for a couple reasons. It fits with the naming policy. It's a serene and natural name, and also it's on the west side of the city where the sun sets. So that is our recommended name. Is there anybody who wants to also provide information on that? For that name? Yeah.
I would say right around sunset.
You might have to swing a mic that
I was
way.
just gonna say right around sunset or the evening. There is a brilliant sunset as you're in that area, so it kind of matches with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good neutral name as well.
So we know that we have a council action for you all to do something like that. We do have one more slide with discussion topics. I don't know, Mayor, what you would like the order to be.
I would say let's keep the discussion going.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to the name.
All right, sounds good. All right, so we have some other discussion topics that have come up in commission meetings repeatedly. So I will ask Commissioner Arneson if he wants me to take the lead on this one or if he would like to start this one off.
You can start it.
I can start it, okay. So one thing that we've noticed and that we've heard from fellow residents of Roseville is kind of on that land acquisition piece of that we are a very landlocked city. You all know this from the previous discussions you were having. We are a very landlocked city and there's not a lot of space for parks. And so one thing that we have discussed is that the city may want to consider a more proactive approach in certain situations to acquiring land rather than what is currently written in the master plan policy. For instance, there are certain sectors in the Constellation where that is in the parks master plan, I believe, that don't really have a park. I'm specifically thinking in the Harmar area. We hear a lot from I hear a lot from parents at my kids' school that there's no park west of Hamlin, north of Roselawn. That is an area that there just is no park. And it would be great if there was, because then families don't need to cross the street over to Keller Mayflower or over to Lexington Park. And there's just nothing there. So the commission has talked about how it may be something to consider, an amendment to the willing seller land acquisition policy. Commissioner Arneson, do you want to finish us off? I'm not calling you out. I'm just.
I would just say it's more of a, well, for me personally, it's more of if something comes up that's maybe an adjacent property to a park that would really make the, benefit the park to have this piece of land, instead of it being a willing buyer, willing seller type deal, if the city would be willing to pay, if this is a piece that we would want, we wouldn't want to be stuck with just trying to get a deal for that piece of land. We'd go after pay retail price for this piece of land. Otherwise, since we are pretty landlocked, once it's gone, it's gone. So we have run into that in the past. And there isn't any real situation right now, but it's something in the future. If there was a piece of land that was close to a park or another piece that came up, be a good idea, I think, and we think that it'd be good to have it not just being like a donation or paying a small amount towards what the actual value of this property is. It would be good to be able to go in and buy this piece of property if it was something that the city wanted.
Any other folks want to comment on that part? And then, are there any initiatives that the council would like the commission to investigate? I think that's another thing that we'd love to discuss. We know that there's going to be a lot of conversation coming up with the new campus master plan and the movement of things happening around here with Veterans Park and the maintenance facility and everything. And so that is another piece that the commission feels really passionate about being informed on and being talked to around.
All right. Well, we appreciate you all being here and all the work that you do over the course of the year. It seems like sometimes that one joint meeting can't cover everything. So, and we know that the commission has been before the council with certain individual special discussions as well. So we appreciate that. We'll certainly open it up to the council for feedback or questions, not specifically necessarily related to the name of Sunset Park proposal. I think we'll take an action on that maybe once we're finished with more of the general discussion. But with that, council thoughts, feedback, questions. Councilmember Strawn?
Thank you. I wanted to ask about your SWOT analysis. Was that in partnership with Stantec then? Part of that, or was your internal piece?
It was
Okay.
internal.
And how many people are missing today?
Commissioner Bolton? Yeah. Penny? No, James.
He's right there. Poor guy.
3 years.
And David and Commissioner Dalton.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I appreciated the list of strengths, and of course I agree with those, but I had some questions about some of the items that you listed as weaknesses, and I found one that, or weakness or opportunity that I mentioned to the director, Johnson, pretty often, is the need for bike racks at parks and an insufficient number. If we're looking at a biking community, we need to make sure. I know at the Discover Your Parks event at Lexington Park, there are 3 or 4 bike racks, and it was waiting room. It was like a waiting line for those to be available. So 4 is just not enough for a park of that size. So I hope you will consider that a weakness or opportunity. I just was curious, I agree that looking at the music and other things like that is a great idea. We have been asked before to consider dog parks. I do want to mention that world famous Ghanaian drummer Soa Mensa lives in Roseville. And the Aztec dancers, Kalpuli, something with a Y, they also live in Roseville. So we have some really amazing world-class, world-famous groups within our organ. And so if we're looking at how do we change what happens in that band shell, I think it would behoove us to look at who lives in our neighborhood, but also heard great things about that ABBA cover band, and then, of course, the band that was at Tapped In on Cork the other night. So really finding ways for a lot of people of all ages to come out is... I've seen changes and improvements, and I hope we will continue that. I just wanted to ask about this community center, which a lot of newer residents to Roseville do ask about regularly. And I was curious to know, you put it in a weakness, and yet in my 22 years in Roseville, I've never seen any movement on that. And so I was just curious to know if you had some ideas or thoughts behind that.
As a nearly lifelong resident of the city, other than those like few years I lived in St. Paul, I think that part of it was that, like for me growing up, there was a partnership almost with the schools where like Fairview was considered more of a community center, which is now on Deja, that land. And so there is not a lot of good space, good public use space in Roseville that doesn't belong, well, I would say that's a city property, essentially, that there's not, there is Cedar Home now, there is a couple other, like the park shelters and everything, but there's nothing that's like a big fancy community center that has the gym and the water park and all of these things that, well, Shoreview has it. And it might just be parents not wanting to drive all the way up to Shoreview. I don't blame them. But having that hub in the city and having a hub as a heart of the city, I think really means a lot to people. That there's a place to meet, there's a place to organize, there's a place that's relatively inexpensive to do a thing. And that's what I've heard from folks of when they talk about wanting a community center that is a place to gather. It isn't the library, even though the library, I think, in Roseville takes the place of a community center a lot of the time. Other folks.
I would say that.
Microphone.
I don't know. I'm talking about you. I would say that in lieu of a community center, you have to look at the things that we have that maybe other places don't. And Roseville and the state have put a lot of money into the Oval. There's meeting rooms there. I personally feel like Roseville, for its size, has this, this national facility, and that's maybe taken over a lot of space of what a community center, maybe money would have gone towards, upkeep would have gone towards. But a lot of people in the city use that too. So I think that, having one or the other, I'm not sure that, I think Roseville pushed for that more back in the time of maybe thinking about a community center. And the old Fairview Community Center really wasn't, it had a community center name. It really wasn't much of a community center. It had 2 gyms in it, another space, kind of a small meeting space. It was an old, I think, middle school or high school in horrible condition. So the basement had been flooded for years. So I would love to see a community center in Roseville, but the push to building something like that and where you would put it would be definitely a big task. Not that I don't think it could happen.
Could Ms. Arnis, would you be willing to add your opinion from your point of view?
As a student, I think having a space to, like a community center would be helpful to study with friends. Not always going to right now it's either going to the library, going to a place to eat, and spending money. And it would be nice to have a space free that you could study instead of going to school or having a space like school. Or having a place to work out, I think would be really nice, and being a little more inexpensive than the gyms around Roseville.
Thank you.
Other input or into that question, or we can provide an opportunity for other council thoughts as well.
I have a question. What is going on with the Parkview school?
Parkview School is Parkview School, as far as I know, for the
It's not
foreseeable
even
future.
a school anymore, I don't think.
Well, no, I think it is actually.
Oh, it is? Yeah.
The school district has a lot of activities going on there.
Oh,
I
okay.
think we're gonna get update on that at our next commission.
Oh, okay.
I think from the point of view of exterior space on the site of Parkview School, I think that's something that the city and the school district are interested in having some conversations about.
Yeah.
Maybe more optimal use of some of that space that's there.
Yeah, 'cause
Especially
I-
as we talk about Veterans Park.
I was a swimmer in Roseville, but they were the only one with a pool, so we had to go there for practice and
Right.
training and everything, so.
Well, and certainly I think that, just in talking, the conversation about community center has probably been going on as long as I've been involved in city government here in Roseville. And one of our challenges is we've got a lot of amenities. They're just under a lot of different roofs. And so figuring out what a community center can and should be for the city has, I think, been one of the stumbling blocks. And then obviously, whatever you might decide it is, there's kind of a huge price tag associated with it too. And
I was
figuring
just
out that piece
curious,
of
is
it
all.
is just, if that's something that the community really wants to do, we have to figure that out. So that's where we're at. Other feedback, questions, comments on just the general topics that we've had before us, Councilmember Otten?
Thanks all for the work here. You're tackling a lot of different things with some impacts on the community, right? Some bigger impacts potentially. On the SWOT analysis, have you gotten to the point where you've digested, it looks like all the ideas are there. Have you gotten to the point where you've digested them and said, hey, Park and Rec Department, the Park and Rec Commission thinks you should focus on these 3 things or something like that? Are we at a point of refining that and coming to some goals?
We have not yet. I think that's a question for Vice Chair and I to talk to Director Johnson about. I think that one of the great things about Director Johnson is that he hears us in the meetings and doesn't necessarily let the SWOT analysis dictate that. Like, he's already moving on so many of these things that we've identified. So there's always those moving pieces that are already happening behind the scenes, and it's kind of an affirming aspect that we've also identified these. So that didn't totally answer your question, but
Yep, that makes sense. Thinking about, Mr. Arneson, your thoughts on expanding parks, and even looking very specifically at the zone you talked about, looking at a map of that area, I don't see any open spaces unless you bought someone's house and took it down.
Right.
Is that fair?
Well, that's fair. And I would say that it's that, or if, for instance, let's say there's a person that's, let's say there's a person that has a lot that's, it's got their house on it, but it's possibly has 2 other lots on it that could have been developed at some point. Well, if that land came available and it's right next to a park and it would fill out a nice spot in the park, it would be a valuable piece of land, then, considering that as, it would be nice to consider that as an opportunity to purchase if that's possible, and that would be a house that would be removed for parkland. So it's not something that I don't think we would do often. It's more something that the potential Sunset Park name that's kind of more where that came from, is that was a piece of property that I really wish the city could have purchased. But willing buyer, willing seller, we weren't able to move forward with that. That would have been a great place, but that's all in hindsight, and luckily we do have a park there, so it did meet the criteria. But I guess just moving forward in a landlocked city, if there was a piece of land available, even if it was an industrial place that was along next to a park or something, it would be nice to just move and have the ability to purchase that piece.
I think as I have a lot of history as the senior council member. No, they like to make fun of me for being the senior council member.
Well, I do.
You do. You're talking about, hey, here's a lot with an extra space on it. We actually, we're working with a homeowner just a few blocks east of Post Sunset Park several years ago, and that didn't work. So certainly that's something we should always be considering and thinking about. One of the things in that specific area is if Harmar ever redevelops or changes, theoretically park dedication might kick in, or some sort of agreement would go there. Right now, that parking lot by Cub is used about a quarter of the time, and most of that for snow, So
Snow park.
Yeah, it's big sledding hill. But anyway, there seems to be a great opportunity potentially in the future in that area if we're proactive. I think that's the challenge. How do we become proactive in today's market? We can ask the realtor down the road here, but if you're not proactive, you're not actually in the market, it's going to be hard to get anything.
Yeah. I think
So.
part of one of the things that we talked about too was that we don't, it might be a thing to look at to make sure that the city's policies wouldn't prohibit the city from acting something. So like having that strategy, having that plan going forward, and so that you aren't then told by your city attorney or your city manager, like, I know you really want to do this, but our laws and our rules and everything tell us we can't. So that is one thing that I think more of this discussion has brought up, is we want to make sure that there can be a strategy, that it can be something that gets acted.
Well, and I think that one of the things that enters into it is that, as stewards of taxpayer money, paying a premium for acquiring property has always been a bit of a stumbling block for the council, because, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get, we'd rather put the money into amenities on a park than necessarily just that upfront acquisition of the property, given the choice. And so that's, I think, part of where that policy comes from and some of the decision-making that's been made. Certainly, the challenge is if we're competing with a particular property with a development potential, which is going to pay a premium because they're going to make money on it, versus the city, not saying, we're out to make money, but at the same time, once again, we're trying to balance the taxpayers' interests as well as the, acquiring strategic property. So I think that's been the tension that's been there. And so, if we want to add some nuance to the policy, there may be opportunities to potentially use condemnation if there's a blight situation, but I don't know that we want to say we have a lot of that in Roseville either. But sometimes those opportunities could present themselves as well, and that's another tool that cities have, but obviously there are significant limitations on what you can do in the realm of condemnation. But one of the advantages of that is that you're not necessarily paying a premium. So I think it's a matter of balancing all those competing interests and making sure that we have a policy that gives us maybe a little more flexibility. Councilmember Strawn.
I do think, though, that given the popularity of our land trust and the people with interest in donating their land to the land trust, that there might be a possibility that someone would, with a really pastoral yard, might say, I would love for this to be, gone into a park system if that's something of value. I think we have to be willing, if that were to be the case, though, to be able to allow that to go off of the tax rolls. And so we can't let whether or not it fits on our tax rolls drive whether or not we're willing to let it go into the park system. But I do think, there are some pretty unconventional things out there, and I think sometimes that's where things work the best, because we think outside the box. So I think if we were able to come up with some type of something that made it advantageous for whoever that was in a building that maybe has reached the end of its useful life, that maybe they would be willing to find a way, and they would have interest in working with the city to move that to the city.
I think that's always a possibility that people, and once again, that's almost the willing donor situation in that case. And some of the cases that we've had recently, it just has been, we're competing with development, and that's a real challenge. Councilmember Groff.
I want to thank Commissioner Arneson for bringing that subject up. I live in that little corner of the world, and it's been very contentious. Obviously, we don't need to relitigate a past thing, but I would like it to be able to, in the future, if something ever did come up, that would happen, or at least be discussed seriously. People are happy with the park that's there now, so that has, they're happy with that proceeding. But the other thing I wanted to comment on is that I liked your work plan and the way you organized it, and that you had point people on the plan who were reporting back to you. I thought that was really good, efficient use of your time, and it helped me reading through your information. So that's all.
Right. Councilmember Schroeder.
Actually, I'm going to incorporate a lot of the things everyone's already said. first I wanted to thank you all. I'm really impressed how involved you all are and how much work you're doing, and there's so many things going on in the Parks and Rec. As you know, that's the jewel of Roseville. If you ask people what do they like about Roseville, I mean, even some of our interviews for commissions, that's like the first thing they say. It's the parks. So this is a super important area, so I really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I wanted to talk about your list, and I think it makes really a lot of sense to prioritize some of these things. You can't do it all, in the short merit. So to figure out what is priorities. But I wanted to add on to that everything costs money. There is no free space really. If it's a community center, whatever it is, it all takes money, and usually it's from property taxes. And so that's something, we're going to hear from the finance next, and so that's something, with both, it's kind of yin and yang with the two commissions on that. So looking at priorities, and part of the priorities needs to be then the cost that's associated with that. So as you're looking at these things, I mean, even the oval, we know, and all these pieces, everything costs money. And so if we're going to, we have so much now, we want to be careful what we add, and do we need it, and do we have it in different parts? Do we need to have it all under one roof or not? So you have to look at, maybe there's unique ways to have different pieces of areas to study or whatever, that you don't necessarily have to have it under one roof. And there might be our park buildings are beautiful, and the Cedar Home. And so there's so many of these pieces that is there a way to look at it creatively to help it come up with a lot of these amenities without having it cost the taxpayers, a lot of money. We obviously want to pay for what we have and keep it all up. Yet we want to make sure and balance that against what are we going to have our residents pay in property taxes, and that's always the balance. So it's great work and some great priorities, and just consider that other part about the cost as well. Thank you.
Other thoughts or feedback, Councilmember Bratton?
That's a spurred question I meant to ask earlier. When we were starting to look at, and you're going to meet on Wednesday again, the Natural Resources Master Plan, which I think is really important for us to be looking at, because we've spent a lot of time and money and a lot of volunteers and a lot of staff and consultants, and so I want to make sure we keep that going and we don't lose what we've done. As you come through that process, will there be a prioritization per park, per the whole system? Yes. Or how will that come back for decisions? Because as Member Schroeder says, it's going to come back to money, right? Our current program costs a fair amount of money. I think it's very worth it. But to go and continue that, it will cost a certain amount of money. To expand what we're doing in parks will take additional work. I understand there's some goals to expand our number of volunteers, which I hope so, but we have a volunteer coordinator, full-time volunteer coordinator, so how we will be able to make all of those things work and where that prioritization will come from.
Yeah, that's again a real good question, and that actually is a lot of what we'll be discussing at this upcoming meeting. And essentially, so the volunteers is definitely as part of the core. That's we want to keep that ongoing and even expand. And I think there's even some thoughts that we might be close to almost like doubling what we've been doing in the past. And
you guys are doubling, okay.
But so part of that process with goals and priorities is looking at it and taking into consideration resources. And so there are some things that are, on one hand might be like kind of a high, like a lofty goal. Like again, pie in the sky is like clean up Lake Bennett. But the resources for that, would be prohibitive, and so it's kind of like you have to put all your eggs in one basket, and that's all you get. And so we're looking at the prioritizing based. A lot of it is on what's most feasible. How do we get the biggest bang for the buck, and who's going to be doing it, and so we'll be segmenting that into the work that volunteers can do, the type of work that Park and Recs can do with their staff, And in some cases, there's some work that we need professional services like Stantec to help. And so it's really looking at, again, that trying to take that whole picture and really setting together the priorities and how are we going to manage all of that. And so yeah, that's a lot of what we're going to try to, I think, accomplish in 2 days.
Not,
You're not gonna
not over the
accomplish it
course
all.
of 2 days, but 2 days from now, yes.
Put this at the stage.
In the next two.
I do want to follow up on the natural resources part of it too, because I was thinking earlier, as I was observing a location that is not in a park, but happens to be city property, it's a larger property around a stormwater pond. There are a lot of invasive trees, plants, and things in there. Is this effort looking at some of those non-park properties, or are we siloed off from the Public Works Department and they take care of those, or don't take care of those? Or can that be part of the consideration, is looking at, it doesn't have to necessarily be every right of way, along a street or anything like that, but some of those more significant stormwater pond areas or things like that.
Yeah.
Is that lumped into it?
Well, a good question, and I'll bring that up on Wednesday.
Okay. I saw some nodding from our director behind you there. So
I know we've talked a lot about private property adjacent and how there's the limits that we have with what can be done with that. But yeah, that's a good question with other city property that's not part of our parks. There are some things that I'm glad you brought that up.
And the other part of it too is always looking, as I've advocated before, are there opportunities to get away from maintained turf grass in city parks towards more native type planting areas, just in general. So I'll just throw that on top of that. The other thing, actually I don't even know if it exists, but it was kind of an idea that came into my mind as Councilmember Strawn was mentioning it. I don't know if it's possible for the city to consider some sort of park land trust similar to our housing land trust or something like that. I don't know. Might be something to investigate as a possibility where people could, if they're interested, could buy into that. And it might be a way to, once again, having the willing donor situation come up. But I don't know anything about any of that. Could be totally illegal for cities to do that, in which case it's a short conversation. But I just building on that thought, I thought that would be worth putting out there. So anyway, we have experts that can help with that discussion.
It's not her, though.
All right. Anything else on any of these topics we've had before us? I do want to echo all the appreciation of all the work that goes into you being before us, these joint meetings here. I know there's just a lot that goes into attending all and participating in all the commission meetings, as well as all the events and other work that this commission does. And so it's always impressive what gets accomplished, and a great group of people, as always, enthusiastic and wonderful to be involved in all this. We do have the request before us to, by motion, authorize the naming of the park at 2381 County Road B as Sunset Park. Does a council member want to make a motion on that?
I will make that motion.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, neighbor to the park, to authorize that naming at Sunset Park. Seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Groff is the maker of the motion.
Well, I think it's a good name, and I agree with Commissioner Arneson that you do get a sunset from that area. The sky in that part of town really lights up at that time of day, so I think it's a good descriptive, and it fits our naming requirements, so I'm supportive.
All right, Councilmember Strawn is the seconder.
Nothing.
All right, other discussion on the motion?
Nope, thanks for your work on it.
All right, hearing no other discussion, and I don't think I see anyone from the public who may be interested in commenting on it. With that, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That park is named. Congratulations to everyone for all that work. And once again, the playground build is, I believe, from 9 to 11 on Saturday. It's somewhat competitive with the Wild Rice Festival, but I think people can do both. So we look forward to seeing folks out there, and certainly neighborhood folks, no doubt, will be a part of that. Always a great group activity to do the playground build in your neighborhood park. So thank you again for being here this evening and everything, all the discussion.
I was gonna say too, whoever makes it to the Wild Rice Festival, I've got a booth there.
Ah.
My dad does jewelry and
Right.
moccasins and stuff,
Right.
and so I'll be, and mugs, and so I'll be there. So I just
Great, great. That's why I want to make sure I mention both. They're both very popular and important events in the city.
yeah, I'm excited.
Great. Well, hopefully, it sounds like the weather will hold out too. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again. And now you get to go enjoy the rest of your evening, unless you want to hear our other discussions.
Oh, I did want to bring up one thing though, because I do
Oh,
talk to.
no, we're done. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No, I talk to the community a lot, so everyone's asking about Veterans Park.
That was the other thing I was going to mention is we may want to consider this open space that comes on the City Hall campus as part of the renovation, assuming the project goes forward, as the new Veterans Park. So hopefully anyone who's left on the commission
Yeah.
that's
I
here
know
that
the
has a
neighbors
way to-
around there are worried about like the beep, beep, beep of the trucks.
Sure. Nope, that's all part of the consideration, but I did want to mention that, so thank you for triggering
Yeah.
that thought too.
No problem.
Make sure we do look at potentially that as the new Veterans Park on the
Okay.
campus here. Thank you.
All right, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, then we have the another one of our commissions, the Finance Commission, took a look at the city manager recommended budget, including the EDA budget, and is here this evening with their recommendations to us. And I think we've got almost the whole commission, so we'll welcome you up to the table for your recommendations.
Thank you. Greetings, I'm Bruce Bester, Chair of the Finance Commission, and I'm joined by my Assistant Commissioner, Joe Tupy, Commissioner Anna Vervoort, Commissioner Dan Sagasser, and that's all of us tonight.
Actually, for you, Bruce, we're going to have to turn that mic in front of you towards you a little more.
Just use the one by Dan.
Yeah, push that other one.
Or,
There you go.
okay, no, we
There
got
you
this.
There we go. Dan and I will share.
That'll work. 2 and 2.
Is this better?
Yep.
Good deal. So we looked at the budget as we do each year. We have our usual steps, which includes about 3 meetings to talk about the capital investment program. We are proposing a budget of revenues, $69,088,000. That's a 2.9% increase over the previous year, previous budget. The budgeted expenses proposed, $72,870,000. That's a 6.8% increase over the previous. The net change in fund balance or net assets is a reduction of $3,914,000. That compares to a budgeted reduction last year of $2,665,000. So one of the questions that we asked ourselves during those budget meetings was, is that sustainable? And I think the short answer to that question is that we tend to budget conservatively, so we tend to stand a pretty good chance of beating that budget. So the concern was, can we operate in the red year after year? Anyway, so we're comforted, we're satisfied that we can make our budgets and keep the city healthy. That's the prime objective. Secondary objective is to be watchful and considerate of the tax levy and the taxes that our citizens and businesses pay. So we have our $70 million operating budget. We looked at the capital investment spending. Our balance sheet is a big deal. We've got a balance sheet approaching $300 million, so that dwarfs, or much bigger than the annual operating budget. We're proposing $12 million in additions this year, capital additions. During the conversations about the capital investment program, we talked about, and at least for me, it seemed to crystallize a little bit that we need to consider borrowing as part of the way to fund acquisition of assets. Not to do that, to fund all of the additions through the operating fund puts too much pressure, I think, on the operating budget, puts too much pressure on the levy. And so we're trying to balance that, and we're trying to look forward to probably doing more of that in the future. The budget, 25 budget includes a 5.1% increase in the tax levy. I was thrilled when we first heard that number. That was, we had set our sights on trying to get closer to the rate of inflation, and so that was a good thing. The estimated impact on the median value of the home is $114 on the median valued home. Some of the indicators that we're going to watch and that we have been watching, a key one for me is the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund. At the end of last year, 23, it was $8.7 million or 37%, 37.5% of the general fund expenses. Our range for that indicator is 35 to 50. We were pushing the top end of that range just a couple of years ago. We were, at that time, our range topped out at 45. We bumped it up to 50 to give ourselves a little extra breathing room. But now we're kind of closer to the lower end of that range, and I suspect that's kind of where we're going to be for a little bit. This is the budget that's being presented. I'll open up for our other commissioners for additional comments.
Comments here.
You had all your comments at your discussions, huh?
Exactly. Bruce speaks for us.
That doesn't sound too
We
good.
have you all here.
We're going to work on that.
You're all there to contribute.
That is true. Very true. So we present this budget to you, council and mayor, with our recommendation for approval. It includes adoption of the overall budget, the capital spending plan, and the proposed tax levy. So we open for questions.
All right. Questions for the commission from council members. Councilmember Groff.
So I appreciate the report. This is not totally new, but I like your perspective and I like your analysis. That's very helpful. Did you see anything in the budget that concerns you other than that perhaps we should look at borrowing instead of just adding on in the future years? Were there any other items?
Well, borrowing would be at the top of my list because I think that represents a level of being quite conservative, and I think that's perhaps appropriately built in throughout the budgets, or perhaps we can do a better job of doing things such as the investment recommendations that we've made. That hangs out there as an open item.
Mm-hmm.
So, very conservative budget, very conservative approach. Could we do more? Could we? Probably.
Okay, thank you.
I think I had the
Oh, you're good.
I had the opinion that it seems like we've been trying to be cautious the last few years because the economy's been weird. We've had very high increases in how much we were taxing folks, and so I think the hope is that if the trends continue, I'd hope that the city could be less cautious about the spending, trying to defer, no longer trying to defer stuff until later, try to make sure that we've got enough in all of the funds. That's really what I'm after, is trying to make sure we've got enough in all the funds in the coming years, assuming the trend continues, so.
Thanks. I think coming out of COVID, we all
Yep.
had a bit of a cautious reaction.
Right.
Great. Other questions or feedback, Councilmember Schroeder?
Thank you, guys. As you know, Finance Commission is near and dear to my heart. A couple of comments and a couple of questions. Long-term assets, definitely long-term debt is always a good thing to look at. To use your current operating to pay for a long-term asset, just about in any environment, that doesn't make sense for a long period of time. So and debt is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be quite a good thing. So that's something to think about, which comes up to my question about the electric fire truck coming up. I know that the grants, some of them were turned down, and I know that might be something we'll have to think about is how do we pay for that? coming up? Because I'm not sure, I believe the funds are very conservative in showing even remote possibility of grants aren't even in there. And so I guess the question is, are you looking at the fire truck? And then are you aware of any of the other grants that could possibly be coming in? Do you get any vision of that or sight of that?
So on the first electric fire truck, our expectation is that would be funded through a bond financing. Beyond that, no decisions have been made. Let's see here.
I just want to jump in with, I think the problem was the best information we had at the time was very uncertain as to what those financing options were, what type of grants or subsidies there were. And so our hope was that some of them would work. And we were hoping to hear back, but actually this is the first information about how some of those have gone. So
I don't know, I just want to check, we haven't applied for any grants at this
Well,
point.
we applied for some earmarks from Congress.
Oh,
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
grant, but
Not a
a
grant.
congressional earmark
Oh,
spending.
okay.
Right,
Okay.
and we did not get those
Right.
from Senator Smith and
Right.
Senator
Yeah,
Klobuchar.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Right, or any other funding, I
Sure,
guess.
Okay.
sure.
I should note also that we made the suggestion during the course of our budget review meetings is, would it be worth considering a grant writer for the entire city as opposed to grant writing being done within each of the operating departments? And Mr. Trudgeon said, that took it, I think, as a suggestion that could be worth considering.
Actually, that grant writing is a very special skill, so that's an interesting point. Thank you for that. And I know you'll continue to look at that one. And I wanted to, your comment about the balance sheet. Thank you for saying that. I think balance sheet gets mentioned and looked fairly often, and it's good to make that note that Roseville has a strong balance sheet and the amount of assets we do have. And, most people look at our budget and our operating, annual operating fund, but it's the balance sheet that really underlies everything that happens here. So thank you for bringing that up. And then you mentioned we had that change in the investment policy, which looked like it was going to bring in additional earnings possibly over time.
It certainly should.
Where are we at with that?
It's still under advisement. It's still being considered at the finance department level.
Yeah, we are looking at that. That's something we'll need to bring forward to the council for official approval on that. But we are looking at our asset allocation to see what we have available. We certainly want to be cautious as we do that, understanding there is a possibility of great return, but also want to be cautious with that. So I think in the next few months we should have a recommendation to the council.
And so those are the questions I had. Again, I just wanted to thank you for all the work because this is extremely important. And the only other thing I'd mention is I think if you were here for that last commission, the Parks and Rec, I talked about what it costs to do these different projects. And so that's something to also maybe consider as we're moving forward with some of these things, is to broaden the scope a little bit and maybe help some of these other commissions look at that side of it as well. So I think it's a nice fit to have the commissions possibly look at these projects together.
And very consistent with the direction that you've given us in the past.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
One more point on debt. The city has a significant debt capacity, so
Yes.
that would not take us into dangerous territory.
We'd stay. Our rating would stay high. Yes.
Councilmember Bratton.
Thinking about debt, the council right before I was elected started moving
In
through
the dark ages.
like a couple weeks before that. I'll just keep talking. Made some very specific steps, and the mayor was very much a leader in that, to move to strengthen our capital improvement program and making sure that we have the assets in place. What I hear you suggesting, and we've had little nibbles on things, is maybe even, I don't know if it's a fundamental change, but certainly a strategic change to that philosophy. We've seen other, maybe, no? Okay, no.
Turning the dial, I would say.
Okay, so a strategic change. Certainly we've seen other cities or counties who aren't able to keep up with their assets. So where are the key areas where you'd say, hey, this is where you'd really want to say, this makes sense to borrow here, and it wouldn't make sense over here?
An example, one real quick, easy example would be each year we invest, or in most years, we invest a fair amount of money in police cruisers. That now, I have packaged those into tax exempt bonds in the past, but then you end up with multiple maturities, short maturities. So that's an example of something that probably doesn't fit very well.
Okay.
But maybe a classic example of something that would fit is the campus expansion and renovation, long-term improvement that would serve many, many years into the future. So term, I guess, would be expected life of the assets would have a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think that's, one of the things that needs to be clarified for the public too in terms of borrowing is the city can't borrow money to cover operating expenses. The state law doesn't even allow cities to do that. We have to balance our budget with taxes, fees, and other sources of revenue for operating expenses. The only place we can borrow is for capital expenses. And so that's right off the top of the board in case anybody was listening to this and going, oh, the city's talking about starting to borrow for operating expenses. No, we can't even do that. But I think you're exactly right in terms of the length of the time of the investment. That makes sense. And I think we always sort of had that as part of the philosophy in the discussions back in the mid, I guess it was 2011 timeframe, in the sense that we're not talking about setting aside money each year in the tax levy to pay for the new city hall that we're going to build 40 years from now. That doesn't make sense. We would borrow money for that through bonding. Similar to actually if the sales tax is approved or we fund the maintenance building and license center project through property taxes, either way, it would be something that we would bond for and borrow the funds up front and then pay that back through the revenues that we'd be getting. So I think that's exactly right. And even the fire engine with a 20-year life expectancy, that's the kind of thing that would look to be financed through the bonding. I think the challenge we still wanted to have, though, as a city was, you talked about the balance sheet, a huge chunk of the balance sheet is funds set aside for future capital purchases. And it's important to have that because it allows the ability to not have to borrow for everything. Because then we would probably be pushing up against our borrowing limits, and that's not necessarily a great position to be in. It's finding that balance. But I think, the idea is, and I think what's happened with certain expenditures, in fact, I think we did that in the water fund because we don't have a lot of funds in the water fund, first of all, but then we also had a lot of expenditures come in a short period of time that needed to be paid for. And so instead of trying to, kind of do the rob Peter to pay Paul with internal borrowing, it just made sense to issue debt for those. So I think that once again, we've gotten good advice from our finance director, finance staff, as well as from the commission on some of those decisions. And so I appreciate that. Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. We did not have a copy of the budget to which you were referring with numbers, so I'm not sure how it corresponds to what the city manager had proposed. Was that the same?
It should be
It
right
is
on
the
the
city
same.
manager.
It is one and the same. Okay.
Yes.
I assumed, but without that data, we were not sure.
I'm so sorry. I thought,
No,
I asked what was being presented to you tonight and what.
No, and we got it a couple weeks ago, but that I already downloaded that to my
Okay.
Google Drive. Anyway, and then I just was curious, since my time on the council, this plan has been for this master campus plan to be here on the city campus. Has the Finance Commission addressed at all the cost effectiveness and as market rate of the land here versus potentially locating something like that in a more industrial area of Roseville? So I realize that we currently own that property and that comes with some great assets to us, but also it's in the middle of our city where probably there's a higher market rate for, and this is not my area, this is Councilmember Groff's area, but just putting an industrial building to echo Commissioner Rager as she was departing, she mentioned the sounds, the noise. the neighbors have made this concern, and then even I've heard offhanded comments, well, we may have to acquire properties or we may have to do other things to mitigate some of those concerns. So I guess I would appreciate if the Finance Commission has brought this up, or if we'd be willing to in the future, just to give us kind of a perspective with that information.
Certainly be willing to give you some perspective. A terrific question. We asked it early on in the process, and it was kind of pushed in the direction of the group that is planning the renovation. And so we didn't go too far down that road. But
I may be the only person asking this question regularly.
yeah, it's a totally logical question to me, and one that I asked early on in this process.
If I could, I did present to the Finance Commission a couple of months ago about the project, the costs and kind of the staging of it. And to be quite frank, the decision to locate over there has been made previously by the council. So that wasn't something that I brought forward for alternatives to be looked at. That was already looked at previously. So they were focused more on the cost, the process, understanding the sales tax, the phasing, and as we move forward, as we get into bids and get into borrowing, there's going to be more interaction with the Finance Commission. Nothing else updates, but certainly bringing things to them about the project as we move forward.
I guess I would have to ask the question, though, are we past the point where we could actually entertain conversations and market,
I would speak
investigating the market for pushing
to
that?
say, yeah, no, I think we're past that point. And I can't imagine that on a $72 million project, that acquiring the necessary land, the necessary 8 acres of land in industrial property is going to make the project cheaper. I can't even conceive of that possibility because right now we have land that we already own and it costs that much money. So it seems to me the question's already been answered. So it doesn't seem to me something we would direct the commission to take a look at this point.
Okay.
Unless I'm wrong about that.
I don't think the community realizes that there's no going back. I don't think the community is under the understanding that this is a done deal and they have no choice. This has been concern as you bring it up to people. They're wondering why are you asking us on a property tax amendment for this ballot initiative? You're going to do it even if we don't want to, and you're going to put it there even if we don't want it there. And I think this was a decision before. I've been on the council for 3.5 years. And so I don't know if it proceeded, so that means it preceded Councilmember Schroeder. And not to say that there are other options, but it is hard to say that a decision that was made by people who no longer involve people who no longer are on the council, that is absolutely the way it has to be moving forward. And so I find that frustrating on behalf of the community that we're just locked into that no matter what. And I realize a lot of pieces have been put together and there has been studies and all kinds of other things done that did cost money, but there are a lot of other pieces, moving parts to this, and there are a lot of people who are very frustrated and upset that this continues to move forward without their understanding. I think if they didn't realize that 6 years ago is when they had to have an opinion against it in order for it to stop and to do anything further than what is happening right now.
I think
Well, the commission doesn't have to answer that. This is
Nope,
not a question
nope,
for the
and that was
commission,
that was not a question.
And I'll just say that since the beginning of time, there have been people serving on city councils who have made decisions that have impacted the future of the city. And just because those people leave the council doesn't mean that we just stop and change everything and go back on all the decisions that were made. That's a preposterous proposition. It would mean chaos. Business could not be done by cities if that happened. Now, if there's a change to the majority of the council and there's the council that wants to take a vote to reverse the decision, that's always possible. There are always consequences to those decisions as well. I think if the ballot question doesn't pass, the city does have a decision about how to finance the project going forward, because then that option is off the table. Unless there is somehow a way to go back and try again, which I suppose there is, but it doesn't seem that once you lose that kind of vote that you're going to necessarily be successful in the near term. But yeah, if that sales tax didn't get passed by the voters, the city would have to take a serious look at how we would proceed or whether we would proceed on that project. But we don't know the answer to that question yet because that hasn't happened yet. Once that happens, if that's something that the council has to take a look at, the council will certainly take a look at it. But the process to get to where this is now certainly was not without public engagement, including hearing from neighbors and very valid concerns about noise and other aspects of the project. And I think the council also has some strong feelings about how the project ultimately is designed and built in terms of the impact and the visual relationship to the neighborhood around it and things like that. So we'll be continuing as a council to make those decisions, and we'll cross those bridges as they come before us. But I wanted to just note that, make those couple of points. And certainly, once again, not a question for the commission to have to answer. Are there other comments or feedback or things we need to be looking at in terms of the council's recommendations to the commission or requests to the commission or anything else? I think we are good. Well, we appreciate you taking a look at the budget, and certainly it does not have to be the case that the commission says what's been brought forward by the city manager is what we recommend. Certainly, if there were areas where you wanted to say, let's take another look at it, that is totally acceptable, and we would take that into account as part of the decision-making process. To that point, I think there were a couple of things that were brought up at our previous council discussion of the budget as possible additions that the city manager didn't include. And I think we had this conversation last year, maybe in regard to some aspects of the budget too, or maybe a couple of years ago. Specifically, the additional HR employee. I don't think we'll ask you to take a look at city council salary discussion. We'll take care of that at this level. But I think that HR employee, possibly if you want to have a conversation about a contribution to the Tubman, who has come to the cities in the Ramsey County looking for some sort of contribution, and whether that's something to add. If you want to make a recommendation on that, those are two things I think specifically that were brought up by the council to possibly consider adding back in. If the commission wants to weigh into those, feel free to do so. We do have to, obviously, on September 23rd, pass our not to exceed. So the council may, if we decide to, put some of those things in the not to exceed to make sure that we have those options before us. But if that's the case, that would be an opportunity then for the commission to take a look at those things. If we don't do that, then it would be a question of what do we take out to put something like that in. So you could still consider it, but I just wanted to put those out there and certainly defer to the council if the council says, no, don't do that. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, actually, as a council, we had not agreed on the Tubman
Right.
contribution, so that was something the council did not agree on at this point. So the mayor brought it up. It was something that came up, but we, as a council, we had not talked about that because it also involved not just that particular organization, but should there be a policy in place? How do you decide which organization? Are there other ones that could be also doing some of this work? So that's still, I just wanted to say that part of it. If you're looking at that, didn't want you to think that that was something we had approved and just didn't have room for it. So we're still having that conversation.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could say, maybe the best approach is wait until the 23rd to
Right,
see what
right.
is or isn't
Yeah.
in the budget, and then if there are additions the council decides for the time being to
Yes.
put in, we can bring that back to the Finance Commission and dive a little bit deeper into those topics.
Right, I think we talked about this a little bit in our meeting, and I think one of the things we just wanted to point out is we can approve the budget as we saw it, or approve a recommendation of the budget as we saw it, but our next meeting is not until after the 23rd.
Yeah.
So we offer our recommendation based on the budget we saw, and we heard those ideas and we thought, those sound great, but we can't give any feedback about the budget
Sure.
because there's no time window for that, but.
Sure.
Yeah, we did talk it through.
That's true. Otherwise, I guess I would turn to our finance director and talk about the mechanics. I mean, if we wanted to try to do something like this.
That might be an outside this meeting
Yeah.
discussion to a follow-up. Yeah. But I just wanted to note that there were a couple things that were brought up in the council discussion that may be meritorious to look at. So stay tuned on that, and you'll find out more after our discussion next week. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good conversation this evening, as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to a couple of hopefully maybe more administrative type business items this evening. The first of those is probably what would normally be on a consent agenda, but because we don't have any other consent type items, we've got a liquor license request. I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon to introduce that item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, this would typically be on the consent agenda, but given it's a work session and the fact that this event is coming up, we wanted to make sure we get this in front of the council as quickly as possible. This is a temporary liquor license for Roseville Lutheran Church for their annual Oktoberfest event on September 27th. As you know, we do limit the amount of events people may have or entities may have, and this is their first event of 12 that they could have. I think traditionally they just have this one event all year. So they have submitted the application, everything is in order, and we recommend approval of this temporary liquor license to Roseville Lutheran Church.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there any questions on this requested liquor license, temporary liquor license? Right, hearing none. Doesn't appear that there's anyone from the public to speak to this item at this time. Doesn't appear to be the case. Given that, is there a motion from the council?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Redden to to approve that temporary liquor license for Roseville Lutheran Church as outlined in the information. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That license is approved. And then finally, discussion about, we had made 5 appointments to the Equity and Inclusion Commission at our last council meeting, and since that time, one of those appointments has not accepted the appointment, and so that gets us down to 4 appointees. And we have, the question before the council is sort of, are we okay with 4 going forward? Do we feel we want to do something different than that? And so, but maybe the starting point is, are we okay with the 4 going forward? And I'll just kind of open it up to the council for thoughts on that. Councilmember Redden.
As part of this discussion, we also need to consider that the person who turned down the appointment was one of our required 2 that had to have a 3-year initial term.
So we'd still have to shift
So we would
somebody
have
to
to
a
shift someone,
3-year
just
term.
so we're thinking about that, and we don't have the motion for where we shifted people, so I don't remember that offhand. Maybe you have that there, but where we put everything, but that's something that we would need to discuss somehow potentially.
In other words, we don't know for sure who the other 3-year person was, or who wasn't one of the 3-year persons.
That, right.
We may have to see if staff can track that down for us while we're discussing. Councilmember Schroeder?
You know, I would be comfortable going ahead with the 4 because to me, nothing changed because we had this conversation last time. And I think we agreed that we wanted to, again, do this right instead of fast or, you know, so it's such an important commission. So, you know, we all had agreed that we didn't go to 7. We went to the 5 because we felt those were the 5 that we could agree on. And now that there's 4, to me, it doesn't seem like anything else had changed. So I guess I would be comfortable leaving it at 4 and still go ahead with the process to try to open it up and get even more people to apply for this and get the right mixture. So, because again, we want to make sure this commission is done the right way and not just try to, because we want to speed it up. I'd rather do it right than fast. So I'd be comfortable with the 4.
All right, other discussion? Councilmember Schroeder.
I'd like to propose that we accept the candidate who got 3 out of 5 votes. That would normally be a majority for most of our voting, unless it required a supermajority, in order to get the 5 candidates, and then continue. If they could start with the 2 youth commissioners, and then we would fill on our next cycle, our normal cycle in the spring, because this would take a little bit of time for them to get the ball rolling. So that would be my recommendation.
Councilmember Graff.
One of the arguments I heard at the last meeting was that we needed an uneven number so that if there is a vote, that there would be a 3 majority. Otherwise, we can end up with a 2-2 split. So I would support the other candidate that I supported last time. We would still have 2 spots to fill, and I wonder what we're going to do differently to increase the number of applicants unless we have a plan in place to really up that number. I don't see that as a reason to wait.
We had 11 applicants for the initial 7 positions, so that wasn't too bad. So we've got some thoughts towards keeping it at 4, some thoughts towards going to 3, or going to 5, going to 3. Nobody mentioned that.
Not so far, not till
Sorry
we-
about that.
Nope.
You're the first.
Other thoughts from council members, Councilmember Adden.
I appreciate Member Groff's point on that uneven number. I'm pretty sure it was my point. At the same time, I'm not prepared to add another person based on the big picture here. So I guess I would lean toward Member Schroeder's feeling about this. I think the commission can still operate. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's nothing saying you can't.
So I guess given that, I'm going to lean in that direction. And I think I've remembered where everyone fits. So if we get to that vote, then we have to come back and figure out who to flip. But I think I have that. So.
Well, and I have it too, so that will
Okay.
help, so.
All right.
Well, it sounds like we're kind of 2-2 right now on 4 versus 5. I think a couple of things. First of all, if it was another commission like the Planning Commission that was taking votes frequently, I might be more concerned about the even versus odd number of members. I think this is a commission that hopefully is working more on a consensus model anyway in sort of handling their business. I wasn't one of the people that had tallied, and let's be clear, we didn't vote on these, we tallied, support. I didn't tally for the person that got 3 tallies, and I don't know that I'm 100% sure that that I'd be supportive of adding that individual to the commission necessarily at this point. So I would tend to lead towards sticking with 4, I think, just because we also have 6 months and we're going to have another round of appointments, basically. So.
I'd just like to point out that person did bring a different dynamic and a different set of lived experiences than several of the other people who I had to go back and double check that I knew which one was from which. And so I do think if we want a truly diverse set of people, that we need to make sure we pay attention to maybe someone that's out of your personal comfort zone and into something that maybe would be the best fit for this group of people.
I don't know if it gets into the personal comfort zone, but it was an evaluation of individuals. But that being said, I think we need a motion from the council of some sort to make a decision here, so I would be looking for that.
Motion to approve the additional candidate with 3 for addition to the council to make up of 5.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Groff, to appoint, and to be clear, that individual is Michelle Doyle, who had the 3 tallies on the previous go-around, to be the 5th member, and we'll get to the terms in a moment. I'm not sure that you're where we're at with that, so we've got that motion. Discussion on the motion, any additional discussion from the maker or seconder, certainly don't want to preclude that opportunity.
Well, I do want to comment on that. I think if we're going to ask people to be on these commissions and they make a good faith effort of coming in and we reject more than half of the applicants, I think we're making quite a statement to the population of Roseville. And I think anyone who votes against someone who is qualified has to keep that in mind.
All right, other discussion on the motion?
No.
All right. We've got the motion before us to make that appointment as the 5th member. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
That motion does not pass. That Councilmember Schroeder, Etten, and Mayor Rowe in opposition. That then brings us, so we're at 4, unless we want to appoint somebody else, but I'm not imagining, based on the tallies, that is in the cards. That then means that we do need to make an adjustment to add somebody from a 1 or 2 year appointment to the 3-year appointment that we need to make by our code. I would just note that the other appointment, if you've got the list, the other 3-year appointment was Ms. LaGrange. The 2-year appointments were Mr. Chan and Ms. Philippe Crawford, and the 1-year appointment was Mr. Vemeretti. One option would just be to move the 1 year to the 3 year, I suppose, or one of the 2 years to the 3 year. I'll open it up to the council. I don't think there's an obvious conclusion of that. They all got 5 tallies.
I'm fine with moving Mr. Vemeretti. I agree that there's no perfect answer, and Ms. LaGrange is already a 3-year person, so.
And I think that would, if we have 4 appointments, I'm just doing some math here real quick, so we have to do at least a third of the 4 to the 3-year terms, which I think is 2. Up to a third to a 2-year term, and then just the balance. So 1 2-year, it might be better from our perspective to do one of the 2-year people to a 3-year term.
Then Mr. Chan, to keep a kind of a gender split on the 3 years.
Start at the top of the list. Okay. Is that a motion?
Sure.
I'll second it.
All right. Motion by Councilmember Ratten, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to change the appointment of Mr. Chan from a 2-year appointment to a 3-year appointment to meet our code requirement for 2 appointments to 3-year terms. Discussion on that motion?
No.
All right. Nope. All right. With that, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes
Abstain.
unanimously. All right. Passes 4-0 with an abstention from Councilmember Strawn. I think that takes care of the business on that item.
I would just mention the first meeting in the EIC is this Wednesday, 2 nights from now. So
Okay.
I'll be doing the oath of office, and Tony Montez will be running the meeting. Staff liaison.
Excellent. We look forward to that. That then brings us to future agenda review, Mr. Trudgeon.
Yep, let me just pull it up. So, got a combination of regular meetings and as well as some strategic planning. Next Monday, we are looking at the city budget, preliminary city budget and levy. We also, and I sent an email out late this afternoon about the water meter deposits and a possible option to refund those using the sanitary sewer fund balance. So look for that case. We also have a preliminary plat and comprehensive plan change at 2865 Hamlin Avenue. That's property owned by Roseville Covenant Church to split that into a couple lots. Planning Commission did take that up and did recommend approval of that. I would mention a couple days later, on the 25th, you have the focus group for the City Council and the strategic planning from 4 to 6:30. That'll be in the Willow Room downstairs. Department heads did their focus group last Tuesday. It was really good, so hope you will enjoy it as much as we did. And then after that, we'll have our next, our first, I should say, get-together on October 11th, which is on the part of the slide. October 7th, we'll have a meeting where we'll look at the recycling contract as well as the car contract, kind of part and parcel. So look first at the recycling contract overall, and then depending on what's chosen, whether or not to go with a recycling cart. We do have some right-of-way vacations again to continue that, and the possibility of receiving the utility rate study from Ellers so we can start setting our utility rates. It's still in flux. We're still trying to sort that out if that's going to work for them, but we will be doing that soon. On the 11th, as I mentioned, that's a Friday, strategic planning from 1 to 5 p.m. We are going to be in the fireside room at the Oval. That is the more desirable place to hold it from the consultant. We're still in the Willow Room for the focus group just because the fireside room wasn't available. So,
Okay.
but we'll try to do that as much as possible in the fireside room. And then on the 14th, we have another work session. We have Ramsey County Commissioner Mary Jo McGuire coming, along with some staff, to talk about a variety of issues. We also want to have an initial discussion about police department staff allocation study and what some possibilities are there. Would also mention, also from the county but separate, we'll have some representatives from the community development department to talk about their upcoming legislation about the HRA EDA. They're looking to provide information. You may recall that pops up every couple of years, and this year, to their credit, they're trying to get ahead of new legislation and talk to cities first before that. So we'll have a presentation from that staff as well. And that is the future agenda.
All right. Questions on the future agenda or future agenda items from council members or liaison reports announcements? Potpourri. All right. Doesn't appear to be the case. The only item left on our agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, second by Councilmember Etten to adjourn. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned at 8:15 p.m. Thank you, everyone.